Tulon the Necromancer is an immortal necromancer hailing from the Wayward Shields. Among her wide misadventures is the story of our first meeting. This meeting was held in the ruins of a small fortress called Trumpet-Ancient. This is that story, and how not only we first met, but how Toulon turned a crumbling and rotting fortress to a home once again. But to learn about Toulon, you must first learn about the rise and eventual fall of Trumpet-Ancient. In the late autumn of the year 251, on the 1st of Sandstone, a group originating from the kingdom of the Wayward Shields settled in a nearby land known as the Snarling Hill, a part of the larger Lavender Land. With temperate grasslands, a calming environment, and the stream, Gulf Tubs, cutting through the nearby hilltops, this would be an optimal place for the group to disembark. The elves were off to the north, 2 days' travel. There were peaceful humans off to the northeast, about half a day's travels, and the hostile goblins were half a day's travel to the southwest. The fortress was named Trumpet-Ancient, after music and history. The caravan unloaded itself inside of a naturally occurring structure, an Armagh-built haven for the dwarves. Cutting into the mountain and establishing the beginnings of the fort was easy, but the goal of the dwarves were more ambitious. In the late summer of the year 253, the outlines for an eventual battle arena was established and began to be dug out. The goal was for this battle arena to act as a dungeon, allowing chained prisoners to be unchained and fight other prisoners or creatures for their freedom. By the late winter of that same year, it was mostly finished, the doors being tied to levers to ensure nobody but the prisoners would get injured. By the early winter of the year 254, the tavern was bustling. Goblins, plunt helmet men, and Gorlaks populated the tavern. Elven performers sang songs and read poems. Dwarves socialized as goblin dance troupes entered by the dozens, many deciding to stay permanently inside of the fortress. By the mid-spring of 255, where the battle arena had not ever been used, the dwarves began working on a death maze, a maze that could be locked, allowing a prisoner to run from a creature loose among the walls. At this time, another tavern was also established inside of the expansive cavern underneath the fortress. While fewer stayed there, adventurers traveling among the caverns found it useful. At one point, a troll wandered inside and was swarmed, not able to land a single blow as it was locked into combat, trapped against a corner, its bright blue blood splattering onto the ground as it was stabbed, beaten, and bitten from every angle, until finally, the mercy of death touched its body. By the year 255, the population was over 80. At this time, a prized instrument on display in the fortress tavern had been stolen, created by a young dwarf under a fey mood. But there was little time to dwell on this, as minutes after, the fortress came under siege by the Wayward Shield's mortal enemy, the goblins. In the group was a few goblin soldiers, including a necromancer, and a few Eye of Mahmud's soldiers, long-trunked creatures covered in black fur, creatures blessed with heavy hands and tough skin. They carried weapons and were looking for a fight. Quickly, both squads of the military were mobilized. One group consisted of the best competent axe dwarves and sword dwarves, armed to the teeth with dwarven weapons technology. They were stationed right behind the main doors of the fort. The second squad was the dwarven militia, citizens with little experience but willing to put up a fight. They were also stationed by the doors and put on standby for combat. As the awful creatures made it to the doors, the leader of the militia decided to attack, going through the main gates and confronting the enemy. Even though the dwarves outnumbered the creatures 5-1, it was a bloodbath. The first 2 dwarves were killed instantly. The ones following ganged up on a single axeman, while the others were drawn away. They were able to slay one of the creatures, but that's when a third joined the gang and made their way into the fort. The fort was placed under immediate lockdown, the emergency burrow activated but ignored by most residents. The first squad finally arrived and managed to kill every goblin, but many were slain before being able to touch the creatures. The front gates were now decorated with a beautiful scarlet of dwarven and goblin blood alike. The bodies of the slain lay against the floor. The creatures were powerful, but slow-moving, taking days to make their way into the further portion of the fort, while the dwarves attempted to get themselves together. The expedition leader had been killed in the fighting, and thus the fort was left without a commander, as no dwarves wanted to step up. As the creatures made their way down the hallways, one of them walked into the main tavern, the other attacking residents near the farmland. Bodies lay strung out along the ground, most missing parts. While some attacked the creatures, nobody was able to land more than a blow or 2 before being completely ripped apart. Miasma spread through the halls as a few of the creatures camped outside the stairwell and tavern. Throughout all the fighting, they had been injured enough where they could no longer move. Both were missing their trunks and their legs were injured, but they were still unbelievably deadly. After a day or 2, they were healed enough to keep on their massacre. By this point, the population was down just to 8 dwarves, most of which were children. Unable to do anything, many of the tavern-goers stayed inside the tavern, hearing the screams of the hunted and the brave alike as they were slain in cold blood. One dwarf tried escaping through the maze and arena, but was cornered, with one creature sitting alongside the arena circle and the other up top the stairs. By the mid-autumn of the year 255, the fort had come crumbling down. Just a year earlier, it had been a bustling metropolis of dwarves, travelers, and adventurers. The taverns, once full of joy and performance, were now cold, silent, except for the screams of the dead or dying. The hallways, once heavy with the traffic of working dwarves, now covered in the bodies of the unburied dead. Another fort to be added to the failed establishments by the wayward shields. This is where Toulon comes in. A week after the collapse, Toulon arrived at the fort. Toulon quickly went to work, raising the dead dwarves and other bodies from their slumber and into the living world once again. And Toulon did this a lot. The fortress still wasn't bustling, but it was alive. The creatures were gone, dead, and Toulon was now in charge. The group had been exploring the caverns more and more in hopes to find more materials, and the tavern was still used as a place to socialize. Every dwarf had become desensitized to the bodies, not feeling a thing when seeing their comrades dead on the floor. This was all thanks to Toulon Madalath, and the legends recount her travels and her life. Toulon Madalath was born in the year 96 and was the eldest of her family. In the year 115, she left her home for the first time and became obsessed with her own mortality. In the year 197, she met a necromancer by the name of Lobok Sand-Gods and was taught the ways of necromancy. In the same year, she tried to corrupt her lover, turning them to the ways of the dark. But her lover refused. Her lover took the side of the law, and they were never to see each other again. Heartbroken from the loss, she tried again on the sheriff, but again that failed. She had to leave, settling in a different town. Later that same year, she taught a young girl named Udil polished bridge the ways of necromancy, the same way sand gods had taught her. She spent a majority of her time trying to manipulate friends and lovers to do her bidding, each ending in the loss of a person. In the year 193, she tried to manipulate Udil, the kid she taught necromancy to, but unfortunately Udil snapped. And again, Toulon had to flee, settling in Belprusse, but that wouldn't last long. In 208, she authored a book called The Classic Mountain Homes, and it still remains in Belprusse today. She then authored another series of books, The Better Tower, On the Tower, and The Tower Explained, and her last book, Can a Dwarf Save the World?, of which Toulon still keeps on her person in Trumpet-Ancient. After leaving, Toulon left the Wayward Shields, and then settled in the ruins of Trumpet-Ancient, reanimating scores of undead servants to do her bidding, the first of which was to kill the remaining creatures. Then Toulon took over, allowing migrants back into the fort, where it is still run in the present in the midwinter of 255. The life of Toulon will be monitored. It will be known, and I hope that one day we get to meet Toulon again. In another year, in another fortress, another time, in another situation. Maybe then we'll be able to have a talk. Remember that every single one, every creature in your fort, in your world, they have their own thoughts, their own families, their own motivation and goals. And behind everything, there's a story. It's your job to find it. Thank you.